Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'm State Representative Natalie Blais. I represent the 1st Franklin District, which includes 18 communities in Western Massachusetts. Those 17 towns, half of the city of Greenfield. It is the most rural district in the Commonwealth with over 450 square miles, multiple regional school districts. Corinne is telling me I need to lean into the mic a little bit. Multiple regional school districts who you are going to get to hear from today. When I was first elected, we were both very, very proud to vote in support of the Student Opportunity Act. But one of the things that we learned right off the bat was that it was not going to support the schools, many of the schools, the majority of the schools in our districts. So we were able to insert a provision into the Student Opportunity Act to create a Rural Schools Commission. I was proud to do that work alongside then Senator Adam Hinds, and that created a report that included 36 recommendations. I want to make sure to take an opportunity to thank all of our partners who have been with us in this work for a very long time, since the beginning, since the passage of the Student Opportunity Act. That includes the Massachusetts Association of Superintendents, school committees, regional schools, MTA, the Massachusetts School Business Officers Association, MMA, STAM, everybody, AFT, everybody has really been working together to try to sort out what the best path forward is for rural schools. Because what we know, based on this report and the 36 recommendations that were included in it, is that rural schools face very unique fiscal challenges. And our report is not the only report that points to this. There have been several reports over the years that speak to how we really need to be looking at rural schools a little bit differently. So if we could go to the next slide. I'm not in control of, oh, Corinne's got it, she's running. And if I could just take an opportunity right now to say thank you to our offices for organizing this and for bringing us all together. Thank you to the reps and the senators who are joining us online. We have members from the speaker's office and the education committees. So people have all come together from really across the state for this briefing today, and we appreciate that. So what you see on the slide before you takes you sort of through the history of what we've talked about. The Foundation Budget Review Commission's work in 2015. DESE then issued a separate report in 2018. In 2019, we passed the Student Opportunity Act that included this provision for the Rural Schools Commission, whose report was published in 2022. And again, we are proud supporters of the Student Opportunity Act. We are proud to take that vote, but we did recognize that that funding is not going to rural schools across the Commonwealth. So the bills that we're talking about today, H517 and S314, build on the recommendations included in the Commission's report. It is important to note, if we could go to the next slide, that while there are provisions in this bill that support rural schools, one more slide, there are also provisions in this bill that support all schools. And when we drafted this legislation, we did this with an eye towards supporting all schools who may have been left out in the passage of the Student Opportunity Act. So when we're looking at the provisions for rural schools, you have rural school aid. If you haven't heard about rural school aid, this is the brainchild of Senator Adam Hinds, recognizing that we did need additional funding for rural schools. When we were first elected, that pot of money was $1 million. Today, we've been able to get that up to $16 million. What we know is, based on the Commission's report, that this fund should be at $60 million, not 1660. So we've come a long way, and there's much more to do. The other two provisions for rural school aid, declining enrollment aid, and many more urban districts are seeing declining enrollment now. So this is also something that could be helping some more urban districts. Accountability, and then provisions for all schools. I'm sure you all have heard about the transportation challenges that we're seeing: shared services and regionalization, special education, and MSBA assistance. Go to the next slide, please. So I talked about rural school aid. What we have right now with the $16 million is 67 school districts who are eligible for rural school aid. It is based on student density and it is based on per capita income. So we do have that at $16 million. We need to get that up to 60. Another provision in the bill is declining enrollment aid. So this would create a fund to assist districts with substantial and chronic enrollment decline. Some of these more urban districts are seeing declining enrollment. What we are seeing in rural communities is chronic, substantial. We have been experiencing it for years and years. Martha Thurber here from Mohawk Trail Regional School District will talk a little bit about that. We're also looking at transportation costs. It takes longer to get students from home to school in rural school districts. Some of our students are spending over an hour and 15 minutes on buses, both to and from school. Many of them are not able to participate in programs, either sports or clubs, because there is no way for them to get back on a late bus after those programs occur. So this is looking at funding these transportation costs and paying for the extraordinary transportation costs that our rural school districts are facing. And then we're going to move into some of these provisions that support all schools. So technical assistance. What we know with the Massachusetts School Building Authority is that when schools are regionalized, our communities are left trying to figure out what to do with those buildings. So that is a problem. We want to help MSBA, help our communities to identify what happens next with those school buildings. We're also looking at increasing the amount of MSBA aid for the construction and renovation of school buildings to 90% of total project cost for regional school districts. Our communities they're reliant upon a residential tax base. We don't have industry, we don't have commercial. And so our communities feel this very deeply. Our community members feel this very deeply. While they want to support our local schools, they're having to make really difficult choices between funding schools or buying a new fire truck. And when you don't have that money, you're forced to make difficult decisions. You're pitting your finance committees against your school committees, against your select boards. And while everybody wants what's best for these students, it really becomes a difficult choice. So this is a couple of provisions that would provide technical assistance for all schools. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jo Comerford.
Hey, everybody.
Transition.
It was a beautiful transition. I'm Jo Comerford. I represent the Hampshire Franklin Worcester District in the Massachusetts Senate. That's 782 square miles, many rural communities. I want to start by recognizing Chair Blais' real leadership in the rural school world. Of course, I'm happy to pick up this baton from Adam Hines, who is a great colleague. And clearly, it is an area of great interest. In fact, I think it's safe to say that for Natalie and I, this is true, education funding in both of our districts are the absolute top issue. And it's not that our people don't care about healthcare or the environment or transportation or housing. It's just that the crisis in our communities is so acute. I would call it existential. Right now in communities that I represent and that we share, as Chair Blais said, finance committees, select boards, town councils are meeting and they're making brutal choices. And it's all in the name of getting their kids the education that they need and deserve, but it's coming at great expense. And in some communities, they will not be able to do that. And we will see a hemorrhage of educators. A couple of years ago at a Ways and Means Committee meeting hearing that Chair Blais and I were at, we talked about Western Mass cutting educators a dozen at a time. Right now in Western Mass, we're cutting educators 2 or 3 dozen at a time. And that is not hyperbole. So like Chair Blais, I want to recognize that there are Senate staff here and online. And we're really grateful, and senators online, and we're grateful that the Senate President and the Senate Ways and Means are also tuned in. So this picks up in this slideshow about the bill. We're going to talk about the bill's relationship to transportation. As Chair Blais said, our kids in rural districts, they go a much longer distance. We have one bid contracts, right? We only have one company bidding, and that means that we pay an exorbitant amount. So this looks at more transportation amendments, like fully funding non-resident pupil transportation. That's one of the things that is highly expensive for districts. 100% of special education transportation. That's when we send a child out of district in a rural community. That could be an hour-and-a-half ride for one child. And of course, that child should get the education they need and deserve. But can you imagine a 3-hour round trip and the cost of that? And then children who are in foster care. This is an area that the auditor, then Auditor Bump, has cited as a real deficiency. When we transition a child to a new district, it is at great expense. And again, that child should be able to go to the school of their choice where their families believe they should be best served. That is a high expense. This is about shared services and regionalization. Now, we understand in rural communities, often we're faced with questions about why don't you all regionalize? And as Chair Blais said, many of our districts are already regionalized. And in some of our districts, they're talking about hyper regionalization. So 2 districts merging with each other. That's how dire things are. And that's how willing rural communities and schools with low and declining enrollment are to be part of the solution. But we have to help them. We have to help them. And right now, we are not helping them in the ways that they can and should be helped. So this is about shared services. Can we do better with back office services? The answer is yes, we can, but the state has to help. You know, could we back office accountants? Could we back office HR? Sure, we could, but the state has to help. Could we do a regional aid bonus? So if a school district regionalized, could they get an extra bolus of $200 a student to help them make that transition? Part of the reason that school districts don't regionalize is that they have different hold harmless, we're probably going to hear about hold harmless buffers, and or they get different per pupil funding from the state. So this would help level them out. And then they may need extra people to help make this happen. They may need an extra couple of educators, an extra couple of paraprofessionals, an extra couple of administrators to help make the transition. The state should be willing to do that if this district is going to regionalize. And this is more on this. So this is a regional school district foundation aid fund. It helps, again, districts that have different relationships with per pupil funding, with their hold harmless buffer, with what they're expecting to get per student. It helps even it out. So one district can come in a more powerful, that perhaps would get a smaller per pupil expenditure, can come to the table level with another district. This is a superintendent union formation grant. Can one superintendent be a superintendent for multiple districts? The answer is yes, they could. Again, the state has a responsibility to help make that happen. And could school districts get help with funding to figure out these really complex questions about funding, about staffing, about school buildings that Chair Blais talked about earlier? Can they get help with that? Technical assistance, money to bring in experts, money to convene meetings, both public and a working group? The answer is yes, they can. We should help them in real ways. Next slide. And this is about special education.
A lot of small print.
There's a lot of small print, so I won't read the small print. Oh, I know. So someone has a view about special education. So right now in the Commonwealth, we fund special education differently than we fund, for example, low-income students, right? We fund special education through an assumed percentage. So the state right now says, okay, we're going to assume you have this many special education students. The problem is that many, in fact, most districts have percentages far and above what is considered the minimum threshold, far and above the state average. And so this plus circuit breaker, which is extraordinary special education costs, have to be looked at. We just have to do it because the Student Opportunity Act did not tackle this. And we open up the Student Opportunity Act, which Chair Blais and I believe we have to, along with the municipal contribution formula, it must be opened, right? It's time to open both of those in a formal conference, right? Like the Foundation Budget Review Commission was 10 years ago. We must do that, but this is a piece of that, pulling that out and saying, how do we really meet the needs of our students in the ways that they need to be met? How do we fund districts? Because every dollar spent educating a student who is not met in this 16% threshold, every dollar over that comes from the municipalities, and which is one of the reasons they are in financial crisis. Not that they don't want to educate these kids, they do, but they're going to have to shoulder the cost of it by themselves. And this is reimbursement of 100% of special education tuition costs in the year incurred. So it has to come in the year. Right now, it has to be 100%. Right now, it limits it to 75% of the cost above the amount set in law. And we need it to be 100% in the year occurred. And these are more related reforms. Again, as Chair Blais said in the beginning, some of these are rural provisions that we're going to talk about. Some will help all districts. So these will help districts, right? So everything from development of alternatives to MTEL, incentivizing paraprofessionals and special education licenses, right? Attracting and retaining specialized professionals and funding for local educator preparedness programs for special education. That's going to help all districts. It'll help our rural schools for sure, but it's going to help every school in the Commonwealth. And these are real pain points for districts in terms of getting enough qualified staff who want to stay, both be attracted to and stay in the district. And this, friends, is the last point, I think, and this is something that we struggle with in Western Massachusetts. So right now, on the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, there is not one representative from Hampshire, Franklin, or Berkshire counties. Not one. There are several, as it turns out, from Newton. And so we're happy for the people from Newton, but we believe, and there are many others from Eastern Massachusetts, but we believe that it's imperative that this state board that makes decisions about our schools in rural areas and schools with declining enrollment, that they have representation that is adequate so that when people are voting, they understand the stakes of a rural school or a school with declining enrollment, which unfortunately and respectfully, I say right now is not happening. They do not have an awareness because they are not living in communities with the struggles that our people have. And so therefore the board cannot fully understand or meet or discuss, deliberate on, or vote in ways that we believe are fair. So we just want fairness. We want representation that is fair across the board in state, in this critical, maybe the most critical for our people, state board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership.
My goodness. I am so very lucky to be able to work with Senator Jo Comerford. So as we just wanted to frame this conversation, we have an incredible panel today that spans this entire, it looks at every aspect of what we've just outlined in this PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Naomi Bledsoe from the Communities That Care Coalition. She's a tremendous partner in this work and with our students. But I think what you're going to hear today is how deeply we are feeling this pain in Western Massachusetts, in our communities every single day. And it's not just parents. It is our town administrators, it's our superintendents, it's our teachers, it's our students are feeling this very, very deeply. And this panel is really intended to help you get a better understanding of what that pain really looks like. Can I take this mic off of here? Oh, yeah, okay. I'm gonna turn it over to Naomi.
You can hear me okay? This thing on?
The mic is for the seat.
Oh, Thank you for clarifying. I have a loud enough voice anyway. Hi, everyone. I'm Naomi Bledsoe. I'm the Youth Engagement Coordinator with the Community That Care Coalition of Franklin County. I'll be moderating today's panel. And just a quick FYI, we will be taking questions at the end. Okay. So to kick it off, please provide us with your name, role, where you're from, or what school you attend, and what your involvement in the rural schools advocacy work has been. Now I'm going to start with you. Sure.
We'll pass the baton.
So my name is Sarah Reynolds. I am from Charlemont, Massachusetts. It is a town up toward the corner of Massachusetts, toward Adams, for those of you that do not know. And my work as far as the advocating for schools, I am the town administrator in Charlemont. So I am responsible for a lot of the town's budget work and also our economic work.
Turn the mic on.
There we go. Don't do that again.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kristen Smidy. I am the superintendent at Gateway Regional School District, which includes the towns of Huntington, Russell, Montgomery, Middlefield, Lanford, and Chester. I live in Westfield, Mass. I have 2 sons, and so I'm also a mom for public school students. And my work with rural advocacy is centered around really needing and wanting equity and equitable experiences for my students. And there are many things that they go without because of where they live, and that is simply not right. And so I'm here to talk to you more about that today, and I'm excited for you.
Good afternoon. My name is Martha Thurber. I'm the chair of the Mohawk Trail Regional School District in Western Mass. We have 8 small towns, all of them under 2,000 people who make up our district. They probably have never heard of many of them: Hawley, Buckland, Coleraine, Charlemont. I've been working to try and gain equity for rural school funding for about the last 10 years. I've been a school committee chair for 13 years. I've been on the committee for 15 years. This is a fight that is ongoing and has become critical because we have gotten to the point where our towns can simply no longer provide the money that they have been providing because they're bumping up against their levy ceiling. They can no longer tax, even if they wanted to pass and could pass Proposition 2.5. So we have been in this fight for a long time. We made progress, as Rep. Blais pointed out, but there's a long way to go, and it is becoming increasingly critical.
Hi, my name is Mystic Glenn. I am a youth leader for the Communities That Care Coalition. We represent the Franklin County region. I'm a rising sophomore at Pioneer Valley, Northfield.
Hi everyone, my name is Amelia Durbin. I'm a rising senior at Northampton High School. And my work with advocacy around school funding has been for rural schools and regions and minimum aid districts. And I've centered my work around bringing the voices of young people together and really making sure that our narrative and our experience as students in minimum aid and declining enrollment districts are heard.
Hi, I'm Jo Berger with the Massachusetts Teachers Association. I'm our Director of Legislation, Policy, and Political Action. We represent thousands of members in rural schools, teachers, paraprofessionals, librarians, everyone, and talk to them. It's really clear that there are very specific and serious challenges that are facing rural schools. There are difficult funding challenges in a lot of schools all over the Commonwealth, but it's become really clear that there's no one size fits all, that the problems rural schools face are in many ways, some ways similar to, but in some ways very different from other districts. So we're working hard to address those specific issues while also addressing challenges, as Rep. Blais and Senator Comerford said, that affect other districts as well. So it's great to be here with educators, students.
Thanks, guys. It's so great to be here with all of you. All right, my next and first question for all of you is, what do you love about living or growing up in a rural community or rural region? I'm going to start with you, Sarah.
So I grew up in Charlemont, which is why I became the town administrator. And what I love about it is that there is a lot of open space and beautiful places. It allowed me to have an agricultural background upbringing. So I have children that raise sheep and do all sorts of things that they learn through 4-H in school. So like I said, I like the open space. One of the things that makes it a lot different from here is I got lost trying to get to a different T station today because we're so rural that when you drive somewhere, you drive half an hour to do your grocery shopping. And city driving down here is not something that I was willing to take on. So that's how rural my upbringing is and why I love it.
So I love being the superintendent of a rural district because, as Martha was saying, it's a big geographic area. So it's 151 square miles with the 6 towns. But my district only has 730 students. And so I can know those students and know those families and know the communities. And so I know all of the select board members, all the highway guys, all of the families I work with. I just came from a conference where we were bringing 4 students along with some staff, and other superintendents were just meeting the students that they brought for the first time, and mine were like, Miss Smidy, how are your kids? And so it's a very tight-knit community, even though we're large geographically.
I could echo the part that Sarah was saying about the environmental beauty and just being somewhere where there's not a lot of people. Too many people in too small a space kind of gives me cringes. So that's why I'm out there. But mostly I like knowing all the people in my community. I like being able to work with them and know them by name for the most part. And also because you live in a small town, you have an immediate, impact that you can see right away on what you're doing. So that's what makes all of this worthwhile for me.
I really love living in a rural community because we are really close and everyone's very supportive and like ready to rally behind you, and you know everybody, like their grandparents, where they live, everything about them. And yeah, the landscape is really beautiful and the hikes are really great.
I think almost everybody in one way or another has touched on the community aspect. And I think that's a really wonderful part of living in a rural region. And I will also say, living in an agricultural area, my school was able to partner with local farms and community gardens. And so we get fresh food and produce for lunches a couple times a week, which is delicious and wonderful.
I actually don't live in a rural area. I grew up in Cambridge, which is where I live now. We have great playgrounds my daughter loves. But I'll say that when she was younger, growing up not in a rural area and then learning about rural areas has given me a different perspective. And I think a lot of us in this building, people who work here, obviously don't come from rural areas. And we in Cambridge consolidated middle schools a while ago. We had 10 K-8s and ended up making middle schools all 4 middle schools. And you could do that major consolidation from 10 to 4, and still everybody could walk to their school. The idea that you would have to take a bus an hour is just something we don't think about. We do have buses in Cambridge, but school buses, but they're so that you could go to any school you choose to in the city, not because you need a bus to get to school. So I think there are a lot of issues like that people who haven't grown up in rural areas often just don't think about. When you think about, why don't you just consolidate schools? Well, enrollment's defining. The idea that could mean a 20 or 30 mile trip is just something that's not usually top of mind for people not from rural areas. So it's great to be with people who really understand rural areas.
Thank you. You guys are making me reflect on how special our area is. That you can't really go to a CVS without knowing someone, which I imagine some of you are like, oh, that's actually going to haunt me. Maybe I don't want to see the person I went to high school with, but it can be nice. You know each other and your backgrounds. So Kristen, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about your role as superintendent and what you love and what is challenging about it?
Thank you. So as I said earlier, I do love knowing everyone. That has been a big benefit in feeling really invested in the community and knowing what students are looking for and what they need to succeed. And knowing that our school has become a real hub of the community. And I know that a lot of places could say that, But for example, Gateway Regional has a health center within the school where students can walk from their period 1 class down to their doctor's appointment and then walk to their period 2 class, which is pretty incredible. And I think one of the only school-based health centers in a rural area in our district and in the state. I know there are some others in urban settings. We also have a food pantry and a community clothes closet right in our school that we run as a school district. We have an after-school program that we run as our own school district. And so everything that we do touches students' lives in many ways other than just their education. And their education is obviously very important. But when I talk to students, when I entered as a superintendent 4 years ago, the things that they said that they were thankful for our school were the 2 meals that they got a day that were free, or being able to see their friends because their friends live 45 minutes away because one lives in Russell and the other lives in Middlefield. And so in order to see their friends, they would need to travel 45 minutes and then travel back. So it was really like the hub of their social connection. Our towns don't have any sort of like Boys and Girls Club or YMCA or any other resource for kids other than the school. So it's really important for them socially, emotionally, academically, to be a part of this community. And in doing the work of figuring out what students need, the challenges become apparent very quickly. And so because there's no business opportunities in the school other than like the one amazing little market that's in town and the one pizza place 2 towns over, there's no like employment opportunities for students, and there's very few internship opportunities for students. And so the district is charged with trying to create opportunities for students so they can make sure they have similar experiences to those who are in urban and suburban settings that our rural students don't get. And so it's not that they're less capable or less skilled, but because they don't have as many opportunities, they finish school at a disadvantage. Also, our senior class just graduated 34 students. And because there's so few students, the opportunity to offer electives and for students to take classes that really align with their interests is more limited because our whole high school history department is 2 people. Our English department is 3 people. And so when students don't have as much access as their peers from suburban or urban areas, it's just not an equitable opportunity. And so we have really benefited from competitive grants as well as rural school aid to offer opportunities for our kids to have the experiences that we couldn't otherwise pay for. Because as Sarah and Martha said, our towns love our school and love our students, and they want to support as much as possible, but only being able to raise the tax base 2.5% and having the district take up 70 to 80% of their budget has been increasingly difficult. However, the grants are also not issued equitably. So for example, we applied for an early childhood grant that would give us like $500,000 to expand pre-K offerings, which is amazing. We didn't get it the first time we applied because part of the grant requirements was to partner with 3 local daycares in the community to be feeder programs to our pre-K. In the 151 square miles of our districts, there was not 3 local daycares, there was only 2. And so because we didn't meet that requirement, we didn't get the grant. So we were able to give feedback to say we would partner with 3 if there were 3. So we did get the grant the following year, but the fact that we had to like jump through extra hoops in order to even access things that other towns can get by easily reaching out to any of their local partners has been challenging. Also, we had an after-school grant, which provided an after-school bus for our students to be able to participate in some programming at the middle school level. We have it at the elementary level, but not the middle school level. But we actually lost that grant because the grant required 50 middle school students to be enrolled 90% of the time. So they had to be in programming 90% of the time. 50 middle school students at Gateway is over 25% of our population, where other grant recipients like Brockton or Pittsfield or even like Northampton, 50 kids is like 5% of their middle school population. So it's obviously much harder to engage over 25% versus the 5%. And it was a flat number. It wasn't like a percentage of the population. It was 50 kids had to enroll. So we were not able to meet the requirements of that grant, and then we lost it. And then the only opportunity our middle schoolers had to engage after school was gone, and then those buses were gone. So there are just many inequities that I see as a superintendent, and it really does break my heart because our kids are amazing and they deserve every opportunity to have social time with their friends or to play sports. I know that Mystic will talk about it later on, but our athletic district is 4 counties. It's Franklin County, Berkshire, Hampshire, and Hampden County. So just to play in an athletic event, not playoffs, like state playoffs, just any athletic event, our kids would have to be on the bus for 90 minutes to get to a sporting event and then 90 minutes to get home. So that's time that they're not spending with their family or at a job or with their siblings or eating dinner, doing homework. So there's just many things that we have to think about for them. And so my role as superintendent is really to try to create opportunities and find ways to provide that equitable experience for them. And if you think about that timing for transportation, so an hour each way, that's 10 hours a week on a bus for kindergartners, first graders, second graders, like that's just too much. So when there's a charge to further regionalize, like if my district regionalized with Martha's district, that would mean that kids could be on the bus of upward of 2 hours just from door to door, like door of their house to door of the school, never mind stops along the way. And that's just not acceptable. So we're really hoping that this rural school bills pass because I think that there's some real opportunity for equity being infused.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate it. Martha, passing it to you next. Can you elaborate on the challenges you witnessed, similar to those that Kristen voiced, particularly relating to declining enrollment and regionalization?
Sure. I just want to, I'm probably going to get a little bit more into the nitty gritties than Kristen did, but first, I just want to give you an overview of our district. We are 250 square miles in the poorest part of the poorest county in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have 850 students about from pre-K to 12. 56% are high need students. 25% are special education students. So between the two of special education and transportation takes more than about a third of our budget before we educate the bulk of our population. We drive our buses 1,000 miles a day to get our kids to school. So some of the challenges that all rural schools face, I think, are demographic. The populations of our member towns are, in our case, are less than 2,000. They've declined about 8% since 2020, since 2000. About a third of them are over 65 and fewer than 20% of them are under the age of 18. So our population is aging. Our enrollment is down 50% since 2000. And because of that, the way the Chapter 70 formula currently works today, it's all based on enrollment and assumptions about the size of your school. And when your enrollment is declining and your school doesn't have 2,500 kids, then you're left out of that Chapter 7, basically, other than the minimum aid that you get, which can vary from year to year. Our total increase over the last 20 years in Chapter 70 is 3%. 3%. Our fixed costs have gone up more than 50%. Fixed costs, these are not extras. And we've received $0 from the Student Opportunity Act. So our towns are left to make up the difference. And these are small towns with, as Christy pointed out, with residential tax bases for the most part. And every percentage point in our budget increase is a 2 percentage point increase in their town assessments because they're paying so much more. They're paying about 78% of our budget and Massachusetts through all of the aid. Special education, circuit breaker, Chapter 70, transportation reimbursement accounts for about 22% of our budget. It's very difficult because there are limited opportunities for economic growth in our towns. It's basically they're residential, agricultural. There's one town in my 8-town district that has any kind of commercial center at all. And that's the only town. There are also very limited opportunities in small schools for economies of scale. The Rural Schools Report showed that Schools with less than 1,300 students are cost about 17% more per pupil to operate. The administrative costs are 41% more per pupil because you have to have a superintendent, you have to have a business manager, you have to have a special education director, whether you have 2,500 students or 500 students. You have to have those things. And the same thing, it works the same way with teachers. In a teacher, if you've got one class per grade in your elementary school, it costs the same for that classroom, whether you have 25 kids in that classroom or 10 kids in that classroom. And that's what makes it so difficult for people to understand why our per pupil costs are higher than other schools. And that's really the reason. So what we've had to do at Mohawk Trail in the last 15 years, we've had at least 4 studies to try and help us become more sustainable and more economically viable. We've taken those recommendations, we've done those things, we've consolidated, we've shared services, we've closed one of our elementary schools, and the current effort that's underway now is recommending that we combine all 4 remaining elementary schools in our districts and combine them into a single campus. And we're hoping we'll be able to do that, but it requires the unanimous consent of all 8 towns for us to be able to do that. And for us to change our regional agreement so that it wouldn't require all 8 towns, requires all 8 towns to vote for that. So we are working really hard to have people understand why it's essential, because as Sarah will point out, we take up a huge amount of town budgets. They can't spend on roads or bridges or fire trucks or ambulance, and they cannot afford to raise taxes any further. So that's kind of where we are. If I could leave you with one key message today, it is, this is urgent. This is not something that we can wait another 15 years for. Because what happens is once you start to lose staff and lose programming, you lose students. Students who can afford to do so will choice to other districts. Now, choice isn't a big deal in the eastern part of the state. It's a huge deal in Western Massachusetts. Kids who can transport themselves or their parents can transport them to a different district can do that. And that leaves you with a shell of a school serving the poorest kids in your communities. That's what we call the death spiral. And there are many rural school districts today who are either in or about to be in the death spiral. And that is why I say, if I can leave one thing with you today, it's that this is urgent. We cannot wait for Chapter 70 to be reopened and have a commission and have, the whole 5-year thing. We don't have that kind of time. So that's my key message to you today.
Thank you so much, Martha. Will you please pass that to Sarah?
Sure.
Sarah, can you talk us through the challenging conversations that have to happen at the municipal level when it comes to school budgets, regionalization, and what does it look like if we invest in rural schools?
Okay, so I'm gonna throw a few numbers at you to make this so that it's understood. In Charlemont, we have 1,185 residents at our last census. Of those, a third of our town is seniors, non-fixed incomes. We still do a town meeting, and it's the greatest things. I remember the first one I ever attended. I thought that this was awesome that you could go and talk about what was important to you and vote on the matters that mattered to you. Charlemont has a town budget of $4.6 million currently. 56% of that is schools, is educating our kids. We have 56 miles of roadway and over 30 bridges. Now, when we do our budget, the budget is literally just to run the departments and do things like snow plowing and sending children to school. To do any of the fixing, I have to apply for grants because we don't have money to outright purchase or pay for. Our bridges are averaging $4 million a piece to fix. When I started working as the town administrator, I was not, because they're all about the same age, so you have to do. We sit at town meeting and we argue about whether or not we should fix a roadway or buy a fire truck with what money is left after we educate our kids. For years, we've had we're in the top 10 usually for tax rates in Massachusetts. But like I said to you, a third of our town is at a fixed income, so people that I have grown up with my whole life that still live there, you don't want to make it so they can't afford to live where they've been for 60 and 70 years. So the school bit has really been a thing for several years, and we are getting our 2.5 levies yet. So it's becoming, even though on town meeting, schools will get the support because you want to educate your kids, we are at the point that our budgets can't sustain. So we are talking about regionalization. Like Martha said, they are talking about moving all of the elementary schools. In Charlemont, we tried, we have a school district. Our elementary school is actually not part of the Mohawk district currently. It's its own with our neighboring town of Holly. They had done a hay program, which my father had helped start, to try and make the school more viable. It goes with our agricultural community, and it has made it so that parents to that school really did engage for a bit. You know, we tried to come up with solutions to address this, but really what they've been is kind of Band-Aids along the road because the funding is not there. We don't have the funding to help keep up with the numbers that, like what Martha just gave you. When you have kids leaving and your cost for things like special education are what they are, and just can't afford to go in that direction. And they're working on that, but it's something that is in the future too. So we have several more town meetings to sit there and argue about what we're going to fund in the meantime. But the other part of this is Charlemont has a huge outdoor recreation industry that has been booming up the last couple of years. Our town is split by the Deerfield River. We have a ski area. But our infrastructure, I told you many of those roads and stuff, are things that we need to repair to kind of accommodate our growing economy. And we just can't address this stuff. And it doesn't quite seem fair that you're trying to get all your businesses that are just trying to start up to kind of offset it. So we have been trying to do things to grow economically. We did vote at town meeting this year to do a fire district with a neighboring community, which is something that when I first started, the town wouldn't have done because they look at you and think, well, we're going to lose control of our stuff. But we are at the point where we have to come up with creative solutions to get any of the things that in some areas kind of come naturally.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Mystic, briefly, what are benefits of going to rural schools and what has been hard for your school and peers?
My school has, there's 100 students that go to the high school and 100 students that go to the middle school. So everybody knows everyone's names and we're really close. But unfortunately, because of the classes are so small, we don't have as many AP classes or electives, and there's not as much of a variety. Because it's small though, a lot of students get attention and teachers can teach to your learning styles and really focus on your individual experience. But because the sports teams are also tinier and we don't have as much people participating, we don't have like a lot of sport teams or extracurriculars. So students who aren't interested in sports, they don't get to have positive social activities outside of school, or get to connect with their peers. And the track team, for example, we don't have a track, so we have to run on the pavement outside of our school on the road. And like that is a dangerous situation, and we can't actually like get better or really compete with other schools because of this. But we also get to like everybody who wants to be on the track team or the sports teams get to participate and are able to like really shine their skills. Star athletes are able to get more noticed by colleges, and they get to play a lot more in less time on the bench. As the school building is like mostly unused, most of the hallways are empty. Like I think about like a fifth of the classrooms aren't being used currently because they just don't have enough students, and a lot of the classes have like only less than 10 students in it, and even less teachers. For kids who live outside of the town that we are in, they have to, like Senator Comerford said, they drive like more than an hour. And a lot of my friends have to spend a lot of the time on the buses and get home like after 5 to hang out with their family and do homework. And whenever a student school choices out of the school, it creates a chain reaction. One of the classes, one of the students left for a private school nearby, and it created a chain reaction where a lot of the other students and peers decided to leave because of that. And I think they have about 15 students in their class right now because of that situation. And whenever there's a lot less students, they get less opportunities, and the class right now is struggling to have like a math or English program for them. Also, it takes a lot longer to fix problems in the building. Lights are not working a lot of the time, and the cafeteria we were eating in the dark for a little while because we couldn't find funding to pay for it. And this is just a few of the issues that we have to deal with on the day-to-day because we live in a rural school.
Thank you so much, Mystic. Amelia, how have you witnessed your peers navigate advocacy for rural schools in rural regions?
So I'm really grateful to have been a part of a broader youth advocacy movement for public education in our schools in Western Mass. I was the co-chair of the Northampton Youth Commission and the chair of a budget subcommittee. And so a group of 15 of us made the trip to the Boston State House here, and we met with Education Secretary Patrick Butler to kind of convey the needs of our district as well as districts surrounding. We've also stayed really engaged in local conversations around funding. A group of us joined the hundreds of students in Western Mass who went to the Education and Local Aid Ways and Means hearing. And we also realized that we wanted to promote more voices in our area. And so we ended up a group of 8 or 9 people in the Youth Commission, reached out to 6 other surrounding school districts, including Superintendent Smidy, and we hosted a total of 7 districts and representatives from each district at Northampton High School. And we brought Secretary Tutwiler as well as a team from the Massachusetts Education Department out to Northampton. And we did our best to highlight a range of topics and youth voices and experiences from these 7 districts. Yeah.
Thank you. How does this bill help provide equal access to education for all students?
I think when we have these really large cuts in our districts and areas, they hurt the entire community, but they end up being particularly devastating for our most vulnerable students. So that's students who are low income, whose first language is in English, who have different learning needs. And so it's with the system that we have now, it's really frustrating that it does not serve every student equally and it isn't able to provide an equitable education, an accessible education to all students. So from our event with Secretary Tutwiler to 8th grade students from Pioneer Valley, explained we are one of the few, quote, we are one of the few schools in our area that do not have public bus route going directly to us. Students have to rely on friends or family to pick them up if they ever have to stay at school. And so one of the students explained that their mother works afternoon shifts and hours. And so if they ever need to stay behind or if they're not able to get a ride with a friend, they have to stay at school for hours. And it's also true that special education is a huge factor in the costs incurred in that school district space. And this bill not only does a wonderful job of addressing the special education piece, but also the transportation across the Commonwealth. And I think now more than ever, education is incredibly important and a foundation to the lives of students. And I think this bill does a really needed and important job of providing kind of a level playing ground and the resources that students need across the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Amelia. Now I'm going to pass it to you next. Can you talk about the findings of the Commission on the Fiscal Health of Rural Schools Districts? And can you specifically touch on its findings related to special education funding and services? And what are some of the solutions presented in the report?
Right, yeah, I'll be pretty brief because the findings of the commission were very much what you just heard today in really powerful detail, that it's really hard in rural school districts do not have the economies of scale that you have in larger districts. As you've heard, if you have fewer students, you still need a building, you still need a principal, you still need all of those fixed costs, which our school funding formulas really don't recognize in those kinds of districts. That's a fundamental challenge. You also have huge transportation costs that are much higher than in other districts. As you've heard in detail, students spend an hour or more on the bus, and those are just real costs that at some point have to be addressed and are not properly reflected in our existing formulas. And then you have declining enrollments. And the way Chapter 70 works, the basic structure is the formula determines what it thinks it costs to educate each child, and then multiplies that by the number of children. And that's the foundation of the formula that dictates how much money you get. So if you have fewer students, if you have declining enrollment, the formula in its pure form would actually reduce the total funding, even though you have all the same fixed costs. So it's very hard to get that formula to work for rural school districts, particularly rural school districts with declining enrollment. So you really do need particular solutions for rural schools. And it's not new in our state school funding system to have targeted solutions for targeted problems. And we, in Chapter 70, provide more funding for schools with more low-income students. And that's a good thing to do. It's important that we do it, but it's sort of an example of recognizing specific challenges. We also provide more money for districts that have higher labor costs in their region. Again, right thing to do, but it's a targeted solution. High-income districts that the pure formula would say shouldn't get aid are guaranteed a certain percentage of their foundation budget in aid. So there are a lot of examples of saying there are particular problems that districts face, so we need to solve those. And what the rural schools bill does is to basically apply that principle to rural schools, to say rural schools have very specific challenges and we need a funding source or funding sources that will address that. And the rural school aid is the core of it that is a sort of omnibus way of addressing most of those issues. And the commission determined that $60 million would be about what is needed to use that form of aid to address all of those challenges. As mentioned, we're now at $16 million. So a core piece of the urgency to try to stop the downward spiral is getting that fully funded $60 million as soon as possible. Also calls for funding for declining enrollment district, which is particularly a problem in rural schools. There also are other schools around the state, and that fund also addresses that problem. And there are lots of specific challenges to declining enrollment, so addressing those costs. It then also addresses special education issues, and those are both acute to rural schools, but again, those are really issues all over the Commonwealth. And the bill would in those cases help rural schools and help everybody else. One piece that it has, I think, is a really interesting one, is to make it easier for paraprofessionals to become special education teachers. And one of the challenges I understand rural schools often have is it's hard to attract and retain special education teachers. Paraprofessionals are often folks with deep ties in the local community, often are great educators with lots of experience working with students with special needs. So it calls for the state to develop programs to make it easier, both financially easier for paraprofessionals, but then also to be able to do things that take courses while they're at school or in connection with their regions. They don't have to quit their job, which they usually can't afford to do, to get that licensure. So that's a way to specifically address the challenge that would be great, I think, for our students and for those educators. It also calls for reforming the way we pay for students who are educated mostly outside of their district in special schools for students with special needs, where often the tuition there can be $150,000, $200,000 per pupil. And that's a challenge everywhere. But if you're a small rural school with 1 or 2 new pupils that need that level of services, that's really tough. So the way the state now helps with that is that there's a formula that says the district pays about the first $50,000 of cost, and then the state pays 3/4 of the amount over that. The bill would reform that to say after that threshold of the first $50,000, the state would pay the cost, both for transporting the students and for educating the students, which makes sense because those things make sense for that to be ultimately state responsibility. The state actually sets the rates for those schools, and having the state cover those costs would be enormously important, I think, for rural schools and for a lot of schools around the state. So those are a couple of the specific things that I wanted to highlight. And then also, as Senator Comerford mentioned, has a commission to look at special education overall, because there are a lot of other challenges in how we fund special education and ways to make sure that we're funding it adequately, both to serve the needs of those students and all of the students, and have resources for all of the students in the district. So those are some of the highlights. I'll just say we are, I think there's a lot of work to be done. Our members are deeply engaged in doing the work, both in rural schools and all across the state. And one thing that we are hearing is that a lot of these issues cut across, that there are targeted responses we need for rural schools. And I think we all need to work together across the state to solve the problems that all kinds of schools face. I mean, hearing about classes with 8 or 9 or 12 kids is a real challenge financially for rural schools. We also have some districts in one just south of Boston now that has 34 students per class in some classes, and they just lost an override and then they go 40, which is a different kind of challenge. So we're really committed to working with a whole lot of stakeholders, superintendents, school committees, rural schools, regional schools, to build a movement to be able to address the needs of all of our schools with both statewide solutions and targeted solutions that address particular needs that rural schools and other schools are facing. So thank everybody for being here. It's been great to be on a panel with wonderful students and educators who I think have painted the picture much more vividly than I could about what the challenges are. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. I'm going to open it up to see if there's any questions, any burning questions here.
Checked online. We don't have any questions.
Okay, no questions online. Great. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, just want to recognize Rep. Sabadosa is here from Northampton, proudly representing how many communities? 9. 9 communities in Western Massachusetts. Thank you for being here. So, this is the call to action. Senator Comerford, thank you again for sponsoring this with us today. Thanks to our panel. We had approximately 30 to 40 people online, as well as everybody who is in the room here today from across the Commonwealth. So thank you for making the trip to the State House and for helping to educate us. And for my colleagues who are tuning in, we are still looking for co-sponsors on the House side, H517, and on the Senate side, 314. So we welcome your co-sponsorship. We welcome your partnership moving forward. Thank you again, this tremendous panel, for being here today.